Hello there. Welcome to my review of the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, Series 1, Episode 2, The Problem of Thor Bridge. The episode begins with the unusual shot of a woman standing amongst some flowering bushes, almost camouflaged, as she snaps the head off one of the flowers and storms off towards her stately home, where she watches her children through the window, being taught by their tutor, who she is greatly displeased with. We then see her walk past her husband at work with some other men. She then approaches a man on a horse with some words that seem to sum up her mood.
Never allow yourself to love someone too deeply, Mr. Bates.
Later that day, her husband observes the tutor walking down towards the Thor Bridge of the title to confront the woman before we arrive at Baker Street. This is yet another almost silent opening, and I think it could have been done completely silently and achieved the same results. It's clear from her performance and her actions exactly what's going on in her head throughout this sequence, and the dialogue really just gilds the lily. At Baker Street, we discover Holmes has a case, and he and Watson have a temporary cook.
Even so trivial a matter as cooking an egg demands an attention.
Hope Mrs. Hudson is enjoying her holiday.
As much as I enjoyed the previous two episodes and their deviations from the series structure, it's also nice to get back to it, as the drama of the case is broken by some light-hearted whimsy that is there almost entirely for colour. Holmes explains that Neil Gibson, an American gold magnate and former senator's wife, has died in tragic circumstances, and while the case seems to be open and shut, with the tutor, Grace Dunbar, sure to be found guilty of her murder, nonetheless Gibson has hired Holmes to prove her innocence. Holmes is fairly sure there is nothing to prove, as Maria Gibson was found on Thor Bridge with a bullet wound to her head and a note from Grace Dunbar inviting her to the bridge. A recently fired gun matching the bullet was found in Dunbar's wardrobe. After a brief visit from an employee of Gibson's who cast aspersions on Gibson's character, Gibson himself arrives, offering any fee for a solution.
Now let me say right here, Mr. Holmes, money is nothing to me in this business.
And we get a quote directly from the original stories.
My professional charges are at a fixed rate. I do not vary them, save when I remit them altogether.
Which is arguably not true. But I think the point of Sherlock saying this to Gibson is to hint that he doesn't think there is anything untoward at play, and Gibson will be charged fairly. It's worth noting that Gibson is played by Daniel Massey, son of Raymond Massey and childhood friend of Edward Hardwicke, but also the former brother-in-law of Jeremy Brett. Gibson extols the virtues of Dunbar while denying any relationship other than a professional one. This angers Sherlock as he accuses Gibson of lying and quite forcefully throws him out.
Do you dismiss my case?
No, Mr. Gibson, I dismiss you. The case is quite sufficiently complicated without the added difficulty of false information.
It seems this was a bluff in order to get Gibson to return with a more honest approach, but the bluff failed to elicit the response that Holmes wanted, so Holmes and Watson are forced to continue this case alone. They meet with Dunbar, but before they can get any information from her, Gibson arrives to throw them out. Eventually he comes around and they are invited to Gibson's manor house the following day. This little runaround that begins with Holmes insulting Gibson feels a little like story filler from Doyle. We've seen similar situations before where Holmes has insulted clients in various ways and managed to stay on the case, But here, not only does he do so, but he does it on a hunch. This only serves to create a false barrier to artificially extend the length of the story. I'm not going to hold it against the episode, but it's a bit cheap, and I feel like it could have been done in a better way, as it has been before. A local policeman escorts Holmes and Watson to the scene of the crime, where he gives away pretty much the entirety of the mystery. Although this comes in such a way as to not be obvious unless you already know the story or are paying close attention. The gun used was one of a pair, but the other is missing. The note was clutched tight in Maria Gibson's left hand, and the shot was fired at close range. And there is a small nick taken out of one of the stones on the walls of the bridge.
That is curious.
Oh, yes, sir, we noticed that. I expect it's been done by some passerby.
I'm not going to spoil it further just yet, but these are the clues that will point you to exactly what happened to Maria Gibson. Whether it is wise or not to put all this information together in this way, so it acts more like a riddle than a mystery, I'm not sure. Although, I have to be honest, I failed to put it together when I first watched the episode. Bates, the employee from earlier, gives the two a tour of the house while they wait for Gibson, and it's pretty clear he was in love with Maria. Gibson then gives us some of Maria's backstory and fills out her character, while admitting that he no longer loved Maria and was purposely cruel to her so she would fall out of love with him. But she didn't, even when Gibson fell for Dunbar.
I said if I could, I'd marry her, but it was out of my power. Money was no object. I'd do all I could to make her happy. Come.
Gibson's only theory is that Dunbar acted in self-defence when Maria made plans to murder her, but Dunbar denies this. Holmes continues to investigate, as it makes no sense to him that she would hide the murder weapon in her own wardrobe when she could have easily thrown it into the water the bridge runs over. Eventually, Watson comes to the theory that Gibson killed his wife and framed Dunbar, killing two birds with one stone by getting rid of both of the women who were giving him problems in his life, throwing the murder weapon in the lake after planting its once-fired twin in the wardrobe. This incorrect theory is enough to give Holmes his answer, and, testing his theory at Thor Bridge with Watson's revolver, he proves that with some rope and a rock that Maria killed herself, framing her love rival for her murder in the process. This is an interesting case of the mystery being stronger than the story itself. It's an ingenious suicide disguised as murder for revenge plot that has subsequently been reused and reworked many times in many different mystery shows. Unfortunately, because the solution is entirely contained within the crime scene, it's difficult to craft a satisfying story around that, where Sherlock unravels the mystery step by step and clue by clue. Based on previous stories, it should be fairly evident to him exactly what happened when he receives all of this information, as no subsequent information he gathers really helps him to reach the solution. But what the episode does do, through the performances and the way it's staged, is make more of the red herrings, while downplaying the real clues. It's a bit of a cheat, but Holmes dismisses or downplays the clues that are actually vital, while everyone else throws up possible solutions and suspects. For that reason, I think this episode deserves a 4 out of 5. Ingenious and well executed, but an imperfect story. Thank you. Goodbye.